Okay, excellent. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. I don't know everybody on this call. There are some new names, which makes me very happy. My name is Allison Campbell. I'm the Heritage Outreach Manager here at the Washington State Historical Society. And we kind of have branded this as a common concern program, which some of you know and have been attending for a long time. We started these during the pandemic, and it was like, oh my gosh, how do I do a virtual tour of my museum, like, when I'm stuck at home so people can still see what we have? And so we kind of threw together these kind of rapid response just gatherings where I'd like find somebody who had done this thing before and they would come in and share with us their experience. And it's been lovely as we've moved out of the kind of peak pandemic mindset to begin turning to other topics that are of concern or of interest to so many of our heritage museums in Washington State. And so that's very much the origin of our conversation today. So before I introduce Steffi and Jessica, I just want to mention a few programs that are coming up that I hope that you'll register for. This is especially for my collections friends. So the second Monday of every month, we have an open Zoom for collections conversations, which is where today's topic emerged. But I have got a date for the Burke. They will be here with us to talk about natural history collections on April 2nd at 10 a.m. So I will email this out and I'll put all of this in the chat. And then on April 24th, we have a workshop up in Skagit. We'll be visiting Lainey and Anne and our friends in Skagit, a fundraising workshop. So that'll be kind of an all-day thing. And it's just sort of a one-on-one on membership programs and donor stewardship and all that kind of stuff. And then the following day, we're going to take a tour of the Heibold Cultural Center. So that'll be on the 25th. So we're going to just head up to that part of the state and spend a couple of days. The other new program I wanted to mention, in addition to our open collections office hour, which again is a monthly just drop in where we just have a safe space to ask questions and have conversation about some of the tougher parts of working with collections. We also have a new group for folks who volunteer or work with historic house museums, and that's the first Wednesday of every month. So collection second Monday, house museums first Wednesday. Again, just an open Zoom. You don't have to tell me you're coming, just pop in. And we've met once and already had really, I think, great conversation and learning together and from each other. So those are the things that I have going on. I'm going to let this last little group of folks into the Zoom. And I want to welcome and express my deep, deep appreciation to Steffi and Jessica for joining us today from the Wing Luke. We invited them, and actually I think Steffi, well, I can't remember if Steffi offered or if I recruited, but we had conversation in our collections group about, some of your organizations are very old. Your collections are maybe also quite old and don't necessarily reflect your community today, right? Our communities have changed. We know we should be collecting currently, right? Actively collecting and doing kind of community work and building trust with communities. But, we don't always know where to start. And so when I think about community-centered museum practice, I always think of the Wing Luke because they have been doing this work for decades. They are a national leader in this kind of community-centered practice. And it specifically relates to both the work of Jessica Rubenacker, who is the director of exhibits, and Steffi, who's the collections manager. And so we're going to kind of look at this opportunity to engage with community from both of those kind of perspectives and how they can inform each other. And so thank you, Jessica and Steffi, for being here. And I don't know who I'm tossing it over first, but I'll just let you all take it away.
Thank you so much, Allison. And it's great to meet everyone and share this afternoon with you all. Can everyone see my screen okay? Does it look good? Okay, great. So I'm going to kick us off. Like Allison mentioned, both Steffi and I are going to be presenting a bit about the work that we do here at the Wing Luke Museum in both exhibits and collections and throughout our organization using a community-based process. So first, I wanted to share a little bit about our organization, our namesake, our roots, and what we do today before we kind of dive into the nuts and bolts of our community process and then looking at it throughout our organization. So hopefully that sounds good to you all. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I think Allison said she was going to monitor them. And so we can take questions throughout the presentation, but then also, of course, we'll save time for your questions at the end. So a little bit about our namesake, Wing Luke, and the beginnings of our organization. So Wing Luke is our namesake. He was born in 1925 and immigrated with his family from China. He was had a very successful career, and one of the big things of note was that he was the first person of color elected to Seattle City Council in 1962. He was a big proponent for open housing, had a big passion for historic preservation, including helping save the Pike Place Market, and was very enthusiastic about multiculturalism as well. Tragically, he passed away in a plane crash in 1965 at the young age of 40, and his successful career that was taking off was tragically cut short. But there was a memorial fund that became the seed money for the first iteration of the Wing Luke Museum, which opened in 1967. So we've been around for over 50 years as an institution. So what is the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience? Well, we are a museum that's located in the heart of Seattle's Chinatown International District. And you can see on the screen, this is a photo of our building, both present day and a historic photo from close to when our building was built in 1910. When it was first built, it was a hub for Chinese American community members, included import-export stores, family apartments, and hotel rooms. We functioned as the Freeman Hotel on the top 2 floors of our building when we first opened. And we were fortunate enough to go through a successful capital campaign, a grassroots capital campaign in the early 2000s, and relocated into this building in 2008 after that campaign. And we've been here ever since. And today we are the only museum dedicated to the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander experience in the country. And our mission today reflects that. So we connect everyone to the dynamic history, cultures, and art of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders through vivid storytelling and inspiring experiences to advance racial and social equity. If you were to visit the museum today, we have several offerings and experiences here. Those include our historic spaces from our historic building, the hotel on the top floor, family apartments, and then the Yikfeng import-export store, which we actually transplanted from our sister building next door. In addition, we have contemporary galleries. We have about 6 rotating exhibitions that open every year that highlight the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander experience through different topics and themes. We have a robust offering of community and youth programming throughout the year, as well as a slate of tours, both in the building of our historic spaces and our galleries, as well as guided tours throughout the neighborhood. Beth Takakawa, our former ED, likes to say that our neighborhood is our best and biggest exhibit, and so we offer various tours of the neighborhood. I like to also point out that we do not have a museum cafe, and that was intentional when we moved into this building because we wanted to make sure our visitors had an opportunity to try out, any number of the wonderful restaurants in our neighborhood and support our local businesses. So all of these things kind of contribute to us being a community anchor and a neighborhood concierge of sorts. So moving on to our community-based exhibition model, I always like to start with our museum's values. And a lot of what I'm going to be drawing from in this part of the presentation can be found in our community-based exhibition model book. So not to plug our merch or anything. I mean, you can't see it, it's blurry. But this is a booklet that our Deputy Executive Director, Cassie Chin, worked on with our community members almost 20 years ago. And it's a resource that I still use and reference today. So if you're interested in kind of digging in a little bit more, I definitely recommend checking it out. We have it available on our marketplace. But like I said, it's a great resource for exhibit development that uses this community-based model. But in this booklet, we start by highlighting our museum's values. And I like to start this section of the presentation with those values because they directly influence all of the work that we do in some way, shape, or form. So first and foremost, people give us meaning and purpose. One of my colleagues said once that we are a museum of stories, and I absolutely agree with that. And without our community members and without their stories, we really would not have a museum today. So to that end, people really give us meaning and purpose, whether that's contributors, community members who have contributed their stories to our exhibits, whether that's volunteers or staff who are helping move the stories forward, or all the way to our visitors who are coming in and seeing themselves reflected in our walls. People give us meaning and purpose. And building on that, relationships are our foundation. We like to think of ourselves as connectors of community, bringing people together who might not have otherwise met or connected with each other. We like to make sure that we're continually building on these relationships throughout, building on these relationships in the long term, so that it's not just a one and done, okay, we worked with you on this exhibit, and that's the extent of our relationship. We're really wanting to develop deep and meaningful relationships with our community members. The third value that we have listed is that we desire community empowerment and ownership. Wanting to make sure that our community members are able to share their stories on their own terms. That is really a big part of what we do. But we do all of this work knowing that the labor is intensive. The more folks that you bring into the process, the more work it can take. Also kind of going along with that, the work it requires flexibility. So again, every project is going to be different. It requires flexibility moving forward. But ultimately we do the work and we willingly relinquish control because we want to make sure that this is a place that our community members feel that they see themselves reflected at our museum. So I always like to start with the museum's values, and I think it's important when doing community work to make sure your museum's values are also aligned with the work that you're doing. So a little bit about where this process started. I mentioned earlier that we started as an organization back in 1967, but it wasn't really until Ron Chu came on as our first Asian American executive director in the early 90s, where we saw this shift from focusing on Asian American folk art to more of a community experience. And I think a lot of that has to do with Ron's background in journalism and community organizing. The first exhibition that really used this community-based model was the exhibition Executive Order 9066, 50 years before and 50 years after. And that opened in 1992. It was one of the first times that the Japanese American incarceration was told directly by those who had experienced it or whose families had experienced it. And it was created with our first community advisory committee. We had 3 community members who kind of co-directed this project and worked with a large community advisory committee to collect oral histories and artifacts and really that first person narrative and experience. So based on the success of that exhibition, we've continued to steward this community-based process for over 30 years now, since the early 90s. And at a high level, I just wanted to say that our community members really are serving as decision makers for our exhibitions. It's not an instance where we're kind of doing this work behind the scenes and then bringing it to a community advisory committee to check a box, to review it and check a box. We're actually working together to develop the content for our exhibition. So they're providing direction for not only our exhibit content, but also helping guide programs and outreach that are related to the exhibit, giving us recommendations, and then also helping connect us to individuals and organizations for content, but then also for programs and for marketing outreach. So overall, this process really allows community voices to shine. It provides space for representation and provides space for community building. I wanted to include this diagram too, which is also included in our community-based exhibition model booklet. But it shows how our community advisory committee really is at the center of the work that we do. So kind of taking a step back, for each exhibit that we develop, so I mentioned we open 6 exhibits every year, we bring together a new community advisory committee. And even taking a step before that, we go through every year, at the beginning of the year, a selection process to identify our exhibits schedule for the 3 to 5 years that are to come. And so we invite community members to submit their proposals, exhibit proposals for topics that they would like to see here at the Wing Luke Museum. It could be as simple as an exhibit on music in the AA and HPI community, to a full-blown exhibit proposal of an exhibit that already exists. So even from our exhibit proposal selection, it's very much community-based and community-driven. So when the time comes for us to start development on an exhibit, that often happens in an ideal world, maybe starting 3 years out. Sometimes it's a little bit more of a crunch timeline. But when we start to develop our exhibits, we bring together a new community advisory committee. And so that will often consist of 12 to 15 people, sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on the topic and the scope of the topic. But we'll often start with kind of our exhibits team and brainstorming community members who we have existing connections with. Not only that we have existing connections with, but they have specific interests and connections to the exhibit topic at hand. And then we'll go to our broader staff. We have our big staff interdepartmental meeting, and we'll say, hey, we're working on this new exhibit. I'm just pulling one from my head that we're working on right now called, Journeying to the Homeland. We're going to work on this exhibit. Who do you think, here's folks that we've brainstormed. Who do you think is missing? Who can you connect us with? And we kind of go from there. And not everyone that we'll reach out to will have capacity to serve on a community advisory committee, because, we meet once a month, usually 6 to 9 months. And that can be a big time commitment, but maybe they can contribute in other ways, whether that's through an oral history interview. Maybe they have an artifact or artwork to loan. Maybe they know of other folks who we should be talking to. So we always start kind of with these initial conversations. Maybe it's over coffee, maybe it's over Zoom. And then we bring together finally this group of people, usually 12 to 15. And those are our community advisory committee members. We like to say that on staff, our community is our curator. And so really when we're looking at ourselves as exhibit developers, we're really more there to help facilitate conversations, project manage our exhibits, and then also, make sure all of the pieces can come together by the end of the project. And that also includes bringing in other museum staff. So folks like Steffi, who are helping coordinate our exhibit loans and community conversations. We bring in our community programs manager and their staff to help brainstorm on related community programming. And then, we usually all come together to help install the exhibit. Typically for text writing, we'll often, as it has happened in the past, we'll often draw from our community advisory committee. So we'll contract out the text writing, usually a community advisory committee member who has been there for the entire conversation and the process. So, again, these are folks who are often very, very much tied, or subject matter experts tied to the topic. So they're great to draw from for exhibit text writing. And then often for each exhibit, we'll contract out with an exhibit designer so that each exhibit kind of has its own look and feel. So that tends to be the main players, the main folks involved with our exhibit process. And like I said, if you're interested in how we facilitate individual meetings, that community-based exhibition model booklet is a great resource to check out. I just wanted to share a quick case study of how we've implemented this approach into one of our current exhibits. So we have I think I mentioned this earlier, a music exhibit. We actually did develop and install an exhibit on Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander music in our communities. And so this exhibit opened last October and kind of demonstrates music as an element of cultural heritage and identity, music as a form of personal and creative expression, also taking a look at the commercial identity, and then music as a healing force and integral part of our thriving communities and culture. So this exhibit includes a lot of personal stories, a lot of reflections, like we all connect with music in some way, shape, or form. So a lot of entry points in this exhibit, a lot of video, a lot of sound that we tried our best to contain. And just, I think we tried our hardest to represent a diversity of identities and experiences throughout this exhibit. And just a quick look at our community advisory committee for this particular show. We had a big community advisory committee for this particular exhibition. I think we had over 25 people. And of course, not every meeting, not every one of those 25 members participated, but overall through the process, we had a really good representation. So we met monthly over the course of 8 months for this particular exhibition. And we refer to it as our CAC. We throw around a lot of acronyms, but made up of, active musicians and DJs and composers, academics who specifically studied Asian American music, a lot of music fans, writers, and then of course staff members. So oftentimes we'll try to engage with our staff across departments and have them participate on our community advisory committee process, because I think folks are often interested in the topic, but also want to see and engage with our community members, see how this process works. So we had a good range of, our community advisory committee, a range of generations, genders, ethnic and cultural backgrounds, and then interests, but also I wanted to point out geographic locations. So pre-pandemic, we often would try our best to host our meetings on site at the museum. But of course, the pandemic hit. And so I think like most folks, we turned to Zoom for our community advisory committee meetings. And it was actually something that was to our advantage. We were for accessibility purposes, because we were able to engage with community members who maybe weren't in the Puget Sound area, maybe they were on the East Coast, but we're still really excited about this opportunity to participate and support this project. So we had folks from all over the country who were able to participate on our community advisory committee. And so for this exhibit, and for a lot of our exhibits, it all starts at this first meeting. We'll have our scope for the exhibit, but we start by brainstorming. and asking our community advisory committee members, what do you want to see in this exhibit? And then also, what do you want visitors to take away? What do you want them to leave with? What lingering questions do you want them to have? And so we kind of go from there in the process of developing our exhibits. We narrow down, we prioritize some of these main messages and themes, and then turn that into a storyline and an arc that visitors will experience in the gallery. Here are the main messages that came out of that initial brainstorming for this particular music exhibit. So we had 4 main messages, and those included that Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders have embraced all genres and forms of music to explore and express our unique identities, histories, and experiences. Our communities have strong musical legacies. The second main message is that music helps us construct our identities and claim our cultural heritage as members of Asian Pacific Islander diasporas and as Americans. That AA and HPIs have faced discrimination, erasure, and stereotypes in the music industry. In response, they have fought for representation and created community-based infrastructures. And then ending with this main message that music creates connection and community. So those main messages really came directly out of those conversations with our community advisory committee. And then wanted to also point out that this community-based model is something that we use interdepartmentally. So it all kind of started with an exhibits approach as far as engaging community members and developing the exhibits alongside our community members, but really it's an approach that has expanded into almost all facets of the work that we do here at the Wing Luke Museum. So for instance, looking at our education department, our gallery tours are especially exhibit gallery tours are driven by community advisory committee main messages and themes. And so oftentimes we'll make sure that education staff, at least one member of the education staff, is able to participate on our community advisory committee to hear that discussion firsthand from our community advisory committee members. They also do a lot of work in curriculum development, and so they will convene their own community advisory committees as well with educators to give feedback during the development process for different curricula throughout the year. And then we also have our community programs department who received IMLS funding to also convene a community advisory committee. And this was a great opportunity to assess our overall programming and making sure that it was cohesive and to fill in any gaps that, for community needs. And then even with our development department, although our house party event isn't currently taking place, it did start before the pandemic. It was a way to engage younger donors and start that donor cultivation early. But it was great because they brought together a community advisory committee, folks who are really excited and invested in the programming, gave great ideas. And then what they did for this particular event, it was like there's 20 people, I think, on their advisory committee, and they each invited 10 people. And so even just with that simple model, like pretty soon, like the event was sold out real quick. So always like to share that one as an example. And then with that, I'll hand it over to Steffi to talk about our community engaged process in collections and archives.
Great. Thanks so much, Jessica. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see lots of familiar faces and names in the Zoom. We thought that this could be a nice transition. Jessica sort of set things up so nicely and talking about how this approach really kind of touches different facets of the museum, different departments in the museum. And yeah, I'd love to talk about how this approach really touches collections and archives, how it also differs. So I'm the collections manager here at the museum. I've been here now for like 1 year and 1 week, so I'm coming with that perspective as well. I just sort of wanted to start, this is sort of what I kind of want to cover in these next few minutes here. But first, just for some grounding, I wanted just to cover, what is our collection? Most of you are collections people, so it's like, what's actually in our building? So the wing has, we're looking at like 30,000 plus collections materials. And that really covers, right, like the late 19th century throughout the 20th century of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander historical, cultural, and artistic experience. Within that 30,000, we have over 10,000 objects. These include textiles and business equipment and herbal medicine and ceramics and furniture and art. We also have a big collection, 13,000 plus prints and negatives in our photograph collection. These span, right, some of the earliest pioneers to this area, to more recent immigrants, and just sort of, the residents of our neighborhood in Chinatown International District and beyond. In terms of our archives, we have over 8,000 archival records. So from business and personal records and ephemera to great public and community events that are happening nearby. Also within that collection is our very robust collection of about over 900 oral history interviews. And so that is sort of independent from our library, which has about more than 15,000 books, articles, published works that relate to both Asian and Asian American art history and culture. So that's sort of the overview of our collections. And Jessica, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide for me. Thank you. So I wanted to sort of also start with a bit about our collections policy and our process as well. So in terms of sort of zooming out our purpose and scope, right, like Jessica talked about our mission here. And so to fulfill our mission sort of through collections, right, we're collecting, we're documenting, and we're preserving objects, archival material, photographs, stories, and art from, right, are these big communities, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. I like to talk about the region in particular and how I like to think about how we collect. I like to think about it in like concentric circles, right? So at our core, it's about the Seattle Chinatown International District. That's sort of what we center the most. And then out from there, right, we're talking about the greater Seattle area. And then we're talking about Washington State, and then the Pacific Northwest, and then the United States as a whole. So we do have this national scope, but I would say at our core, right, we're really centering the neighborhood in which we're located in terms of our stories and how we collect. So in terms of like the process of things coming into the museum, there's not exactly like one way that it happens, but there can kind of be multiple ways. If it's a bit more of like sort of maybe like a non-established relationship, we use what we call our offer of materials form. So this is probably something that maybe your institution has too, right? It's, obviously the description of the materials on offer, provenance information, but then, as importantly, or if not more importantly, right, like the story around the materials themselves, right? Like what are the historical, the cultural, and the personal significance of the materials that someone is willing to donate, how those materials were used by who, what are sort of the important places to them that those materials are connected to. So we're always trying to kind of, right, always pair that story with the object so that, and I put those stories into past perfect so that they're always connected with one another. And then of course, in terms of how we're deciding, we don't have a community advisory committee as it relates to the collection. So that's where things do differ. We're always just trying to fill gaps in the collection. That's always the goal. And then Jessica, if you could move to the next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to talk about, sort of like our approach to kind of more community-based collecting from a couple different starting points. So sort of to build off of what Jessica was talking about earlier, basically how did we get up to the present, right? So as Jessica mentioned, right, the Wing Loop Museum really opened in 1967. And in that first era, late 60s to late 80s, really the bulk of the collection was, folk art from Asian countries. That's sort of where the collection was at. And then really, as Jessica noted, like in the early 1990s, there was that transition period during when Ron Chu came on. And really, it started turning towards this kind of more community collecting model. The museum, centered not necessarily around Asian art pieces, but rather to elevate the stories of regular people. And so you see that, and so this is sort of happening in conjunction with this prioritization around storytelling that, decenters the institutional voice and allows others, particularly AA and HPI communities, to tell their stories on their own terms. And so I just wanted to, we of course have so many collections objects to choose from. I just wanted to choose a couple here. The picture you see here, the come in, we're open. This is from a business that maybe some of you are familiar with. It's from Maneki, which is one of the oldest Japanese restaurants that's still here in Japantown in the CID. This is just one of many of our very robust sign collection and our restaurant collection, right? So oftentimes when businesses, were closed, things would just, maybe end up in the garbage because people didn't think that it would be sort of worthy enough to keep. And so a lot of our collection really comes from those sorts of origins. Things that otherwise might have been thrown away were able to enter our museum. And so, yeah, I mean, Maneki is a particularly unique story, thinking about the story connected to it. It was one of the very few Japanese businesses that was able to sustain and keep going post-war, right? So after post-incarceration, the family was able to reestablish the business. So it's very much not the case for other businesses owned by Japanese and Japanese Americans in this area. And then sort of where we're at today, I like to think of sort of once we move into this museum up to the present, it's really sort of a continuation of the work that was established in the 90s. And so a lot of our collections materials now really derives from the people who are either on a CAC or are connected with a CAC. And so, like, for example, this button down here, this enlarged button. So like this was from someone who has served on multiple community advisory committees. Things get loaned to the museum for an exhibition, and then people decide that they want to donate it into the collection. So to bring it back to Jessica's case study on Soundcheck, the music exhibit, we probably had 45 different like loaners to the exhibition, right? And so the exhibition is still up right now, so I don't know, what will happen, but right, you sort of see like the variety of people, and then so people who are connected to the project, oftentimes they will then want to donate their material after it has been exhibited. Okay, Jessica, if you can move to our next one, thank you. I also wanted to touch on community-based collecting in terms of, tying it back into values, as Jessica did too. So I think of, really the guiding force for collections is connected to these same values that were surfaced, right? People give us meaning and purpose, relationships are our foundation, and we desire empowerment and community empowerment and ownership. And I really see this personally as expressed in our long-term loans and in our partnerships. And so we have many long-term loans in our collections, which I know is somewhat atypical for museum collections, right? Because we don't own these objects, but we do care for them as if we do. And then we are then able to provide more access to these materials through exhibits or programming or otherwise. And so one example, right, is this beautiful Cantonese opera costume here. This is from our Chow family long-term loan. So Ping Chow was in the Cantonese opera community. He was married to Ruby Chow, who was, a force. She was a restaurateur. civic activist, public official. And so we have a lot of material from this particular family. So yeah, that is just sort of one among many. And then another way is through our partnerships. And I wanted to shout out Mel Hang, who's here from the Korean American Historical Society. So we house the KAHHS's collections, sorry, the Historical Society's collections. And there's an image of our collection space down there. And so that's where I sort of see part of the ways in which that we're able to, yeah, sort of like live out some of those values is in these modes in the collection. And then, Jessica, could you go to the last slide, please? So yeah, so to close on my end, I wanted just to spotlight our oral history collections, which we've surfaced somewhat. So, because to me, I believe it's really where you see the wings more like dialogue driven approach, right? Where documentation, meaning, and representation are really co-developed with those whom the history is of, for, and about, right? So the exhibits team, they conduct oral histories basically for most all exhibitions that they do. So that's a lot of conversations. And then those pieces, like, excerpts from interviews are eventually included either in the text or in the design of the exhibition. So they're very much used. One example here I wanted to highlight is this calendar here. The artwork is by a woman named Amy Nikitani. She was a wonderful Japanese American artist who lived and worked in the neighborhood for a number of years. So she, that's a link there, but I can send you guys a link later. So she was interviewed in a 2010 exhibition that was about artists in the Chinatown International District. And through that link, you can read her transcript, you can listen to the conversation with her. And so when Amy passed away a few years ago, her family donated a wealth of Amy's material, artwork, sort of preparation work, sketches to the museum. And I think for me, it's like my favorite part of this kind of collections work, right, is when we're able to pair an oral history with objects, with photographs that kind of all relate to the same person or subject. It's like Amy Nikitani, for example, and to like find that kind of interconnectedness of materials within the collection. So that's my favorite part of it. And with that, that's the end of my presentation.
Wow.
And yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Oh my gosh, thank you both. You just did such a beautiful job of breaking down that process for us. And I know folks have questions. There are some questions in the chat that I'm going to bring forward in a moment. But my first question, forgive me if you mentioned this, I was kind of listening for it, but does the museum compensate community advisory committee members? And like, what does that look like?
That's a great question. I forgot to mention this, so I'm glad you asked, Allison. We often will offer, we now do, as part of our process, offer an honorarium for each of our community advisory committee members. It's usually in the range of $200, which, we're hoping, I know it's not a one-to-one for their time, but it at least hopefully will help with any barriers to participation, whether that's, meals or childcare. We also, another thing that we offer is a membership to the museum for the run of the exhibition so that they can bring their family and friends to see the exhibit that they helped create. So those are the ways that we at least try to compensate our community advisory committee members.
I love that. I hadn't thought about a membership. That makes a ton of sense. Awesome. So I'll start with the questions in the chat and then we'll just open it up. But Nancy had a great question. For efforts to continue adding contemporary community items to a collection, is there any guideline such as percentage of collection growth per year or some other measure to be sure we're keeping up with? And I guess this question relates, of course, to the ongoing struggle for more storage, right? You can only collect as much stuff as you have room for, and also about deaccessioning, right? And so I'd be curious to know if Steffi has any thoughts on sort of making sure that you're actively collecting, and then, you know, as priorities change, like, are you deaccessioning things? And yeah.
So this is where my like greenness will show itself. I think that we face the exact same challenges as most all of you in terms of space and the lack of space. We very much are experience that as well. And it's all the more apparent, right, when the foundation of your museum and its values, right, is so embedded in like long-term relationships, right, and relationship sort of maintenance, and sort of wanting to always accept the things that anyone has to offer you because they are important and they do have those connective stories. So I can't really speak much about deaccessioning because it hasn't happened in the last year that I have been here. I will say it hasn't been a very big focus of ours. I will say now, since I've been on, I'm just trying to just get ahead of, you know, instead of someone offering like everything that they have, we take the representative sample. That's the approach that I think I'm going to try to take, just because we don't have limitless space, but we do care about the relationship, we care about the story. So I think that's the approach that I'm going to try to move with going forward.
That sounds like a good plan. And, you know, again, as Jessica said, you know, when the relationships, the intention is for the relationships to be deep and rich and long lasting, right? You want to be really mindful of all of those, you know, touch points, and particularly with collections, you know, that's, yeah, I can imagine it can get complicated. Oh, Suzanne from Kenmore Heritage Society, we're so glad you're here. As some of you may know, they don't have a physical space. So they have events at different locations in the community. They'd like to nurture community involvement, but it's a barrier for them because they don't have that physical location. So maybe this can be just kind of an ongoing, you know, thought partner kind of situation, but they're looking for suggestions about how to like build those community connections without that physical space. You know, pop-up museums where community members bring items, she says, also trying to collect oral histories. So yeah, I don't know. Do we want to ruminate on that for a second? Either Steffi or Jessica or anybody else have thoughts for Suzanne about how their organization can begin to develop those community relationships, even though they're kind of disconnected to a physical location. I know you guys are doing great work up there, but I know it's been hard. Do you want to elaborate, Suzanne, on any of that?
And no, I mean, we have a few artifacts, or if we're going to be focused on something in particular, then we try to reach out to the community. But it's really difficult because there are people who want to participate, but they're so used to going to a physical location. And so that's really difficult. I had someone who called me up and they have a crayfish trap, and we just restored one of our parks that used to have crayfish trapping. And so I want to go and get that, but you know, I just have a storage locker. And so then you have these kind of disparate items, and trying to figure that out is kind of a challenge. And then just since we don't have a location that's top of mind for people, they're not driving by it or whatever, they're always surprised when they hear about us. And, you know, we're at every community event and have a lot of different activities, and still it's like, what? We didn't know there was a heritage society here. So it's just trying to figure that out. Same with, we've been trying to do an Asian American oral history project with the high school. And same issue there is trying to make folks feel comfortable that we have a location where they can share their stories privately. And we've had, tried renting space all over town, and it's just, it's not convenient because that even makes people feel uncomfortable that it's not like the same place.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Suzanne. Kelsey made a good point, which was sort of a question I had too. Do you all have a kind of robust digital platform to share some of the things that you're collecting, the oral histories and that kind of thing?
Well, we have a website that would be able
Yeah.
to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think just my mind goes to, obviously they're a very well established and large organization now, but goes to Densho as an organization that's been doing really deep community work, but not tied. I mean, it's virtually all digital, right? So like not
Yeah.
tied to a physical location. So maybe they have some advice. Thank you for sharing, Suzanne. If anybody has more thoughts for Suzanne, drop them in the chat for sure. Cheyenne wanted to, this I think is a question for Jessica, ask if the 6 to 9 month commitment encompasses the full exhibit development process, like through fabrication and to the opening, or is that just the development time before the exhibition team starts physical fabrication and works, or sort of more timeline question?
Right. I wanted to quickly share an example for Suzanne. We had worked on a small exhibit with the Burmese community. And what we had done was we did these digital scanning events where we would work with the community and host these events at places where their community was already gathering. So there was a particular Catholic church where there was a group that was really active. And then we also had a pop-up exhibit to advertise the scanning events at like soccer games or other community festivals. So that might be something where, if you're able to, maybe even at the library, if you're able to reserve a space consistently where you could have these scanning events where folks could either bring in artifacts or photos that they could digitize, and then those could accompany your oral history collection as well. But I just wanted to share that because it felt like it might be
That's great. Thank you.
And then to the question about the timeline, the 6 to 9 month commitment, that's usually specifically for developing the exhibition. We'll have a series of meetings. We try to keep it to 6 to 8 meetings. That's a lot of meetings, admittedly. And then if folks are interested in supporting the production and installation phase of the exhibit, they're more than welcome to volunteer for those pieces of the exhibit as well. But not everyone has those particular skills. So, but if people do, more than welcome to support the exhibit through installation. So then, yeah, usually that would be like another 6 months beyond the 6 to 9 month development process. So hopefully that helps give you a sense of what we're working with.
Sorry, was muted. Great. So Elizabeth has a question, which I think probably other organizations here might be curious about as well, particularly smaller groups. They're considering putting together just sort of a single community advisory committee to advise on everything from exhibits and programming and fundraising and all the things. And do you have any thoughts, like pro or con on that, or any experience with sort of one catch-all advisory committee?
I think it's a good place to start, especially if staff capacity is of concern. I will say for our art gallery, we do have one primary community advisory committee, and then we do work with curators in that space in a more traditional curatorial sense. But that's the same community advisory committee that will give recommendations on exhibits in that particular gallery. But I think absolutely, I think you got to start somewhere, if you're interested in exploring a community advisory committee model. And I think that's absolutely a place to start. And then maybe at a certain point, you could have smaller subcommittees, almost acting like another branch of the board. But that's just my thought. Steffi, do you have reflections on that?
I was just thinking, because you said, as a place to start. And I'm thinking, I mean, maybe because my only model is where I work now. So I'm just thinking about that and our origins, right? It's like, if you just start a CAC for one of those things, right? A CAC just for programming. And then you really sort of build that out. You understand sort of it's like the opportunities and the challenges and really what goes into all of it. Then you can kind of course correct and then start to build out to other departments. I think recognizing that you're small, so I recognize that you're probably doing like 4 jobs and not just one. But I sort of imagine trying to apply CAC for everything. It would be hard to see maybe where things are working, where it's not. And so I would think that maybe starting with like one slice of the puzzle and really working on that and seeing where that goes could be helpful.
I love the diversity of opinion within the staff of the Wing Loop. That's great. Yeah, I think both of those are really, really valid, for sure. I also find, and I wonder if you all do here at our organization, we used to have sort of a single community advisory committee, and then there would be sort of ad hoc committees for other projects. And so, for example, we have a Native advisory committee for a big exhibit reinstallation, re-envisioning that we're doing. And then we also have a Native Advisory Committee for our In the Spirit annual exhibit every summer. And so we're suddenly like, we're going back to, we're asking a lot of the community. We're going back to the same people over and over again to serve in different ways. And I think that sometimes we're not as well coordinated internally to make sure that we're not over asking, overburdening, and then missing the opportunity to engage with new folks as well, for sure. Okay, let's see, Dylan. Do you have issues in getting commitment from community members even after building relationships? Especially thinking about how often some of our community leaders get pulled into lots of emergency urgent problems within the community. How do you approach those kinds of asks?
I will say, at least on the exhibits end, we try to find a balance of folks who have participated in the past on past community advisory committees, along with new folks who are maybe new to the museum or new to the area even. And so trying to spread the love, because it is true. Like we have some really incredible community members, and of course we want to keep asking them, but we do try to find a balance, like, oh, maybe not this exhibit, but we'll ask this person again in the future. So keeping that, the amount of work we're asking in mind for each individual. And we try to also track, like in our, I think it's in Altru, which community advisory committees folks, as part of our wider museum family, have participated on. So it's a good place to track those relationships too.
I think that's a great suggestion. I loathe Altru. It just never seems to do exactly what I need. But you're not the first person I've heard to track relationships. Like that's how they track donor relationships, right? And this is really no different. These folks are giving their time, and we want to make sure that we're approaching them appropriately. Yeah. Yeah, Steffi, did you have any thoughts on Dylan's question about sort of community members who are already so involved and maybe don't have the capacity, but should be at that table, I guess.
I mean, I don't have a lot of direct sort of experience with this, but like what Jessica was saying, like, right, like not all 25 people are showing up to all 8 or 9 meetings. So I think it's like, it is okay for people to be able to show up and be present when they can too. And I don't think the expectation is like 100% participation, recognizing that, right, things come up, but that doesn't mean that like the relationship can't start, to be formed. So even if it doesn't work this time, I think even just sort of starting those conversations so that then you can catch them when they do have more capacity is valuable.
Yeah, that's a good reminder, Stephanie, because I remember Steffi, because flexibility was definitely part of your vision, right? And like that feels like a real important part of this deep community work is that flexibility. Dylan, I don't know if if we kind of addressed your question. I don't know if you wanted to unmute and ask it a different way, or do you feel like we got to it?
No, I think that was great. And again, I just think, we're often seeing that within our community that we get people that are really excited about the idea of projects, but then when it comes time to the like actual ask of, hey, can you come and at this meeting, then that's kind of where things trail off. And it's I don't, I completely understand, right? There's a lot of urgent needs facing our community. So and I think we're just seeing that in volunteering in general and all those things. So I think that's really where we're kind of hitting that point of, we recognize the need, but then it is not just staffing capacity, but also like from a community capacity to be able to give that input, right? And so just trying to think about creative ways to develop those apps and make that an inviting or um, an inviting opportunity that they can figure out, see see an opportunity for furthering that relationship, I guess.
Yeah, it can sometimes be a delicate kind of balance for sure. Yeah. Well, we are at time. But if you're like me, you're gonna log off of this Zoom and then think of 5 questions that you wish you had asked. I hope that this is a conversation that kind of can continue. Probably tomorrow, I will email you all the links to the recording. I'll send over Jessica and Steffi's slides and some of the links that we mentioned. And I will hopefully, if Jessica and Steffi don't mind, CC them so that if you want to ask questions, you can just sort of reply to myself and Jessica and Steffi, and we can kind of continue this conversation. And Steffi is a pretty regular attender on our monthly calls, so you can always join us for one of those and follow up with her. But so grateful to you both, Jessica and Steffi, for your time today, and to everybody else who joined us and participated. And yeah, have a good rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you, Allison. Thanks everyone for being here.
You bet.
Thank you.
Bye.